Hello and welcome to Read. Today I'm talking about another collection of essays from David Foster Wallace, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again. This is the second essay collection of Wallace's that I've checked out, the first being Consider the Lobster. And my general impression is that while this has some standout essays that are worth the price of the book alone, it wasn't as strong of an essay collection as Consider the Lobster. Consider the Lobster having authority and American usage, the essays on Dostoevsky and Kafka were really amazing, and altogether it had this kind of great composition. This some of the essays I felt, well, so just to kind of give an outline of all the essays, there's Derivative Sport in Tornado Alley, which is basically just a biography, like talking about playing tennis as a young kid. E Unibus Plurum, which is one of the two essays that makes the whole collection worth it. It's about television and US fiction, and there are some really incredible insights, even if you just pretend that instead of television he's talking about the internet. He has one where he's talking about the Illinois State Fair, which, again, like by his own admission, the Illinois State Fair was super annoying, so he just takes this kind of radical hyper-observationalist approach to just talking about, the people that are there, the stands and whatnot. It touches into some criticisms that I have that show up in a supposedly fun thing, but I'll get to that. Greatly exaggerated, if I remember, is him tackling somebody, tackling a school of thought, like the death of the author, post-structuralist metacritics. It was kind of very jargony, and I didn't really, none of it really sort of landed for me. I mean, which is probably another way of saying I didn't get it, but like, I feel like there was, it wasn't very substantive, and I was just like, oh, okay. Or maybe it was just because I hadn't done all of the prior readings. I hadn't read the things that he was criticizing. So, in fairness, that's probably my own fault. David Lynch Keeps His Head is a big essay on David Lynch that he wrote around the time David Lynch was working on Lost Highway. And that essay is, I would maybe even say that just that essay alone is worth paying the full price for the book, because it is so good. I think it's over 100 pages long, and it's not quite 100 pages long, it's about 70 pages, but it's exceptionally good, and I really like it. He talks about, there's another essay that's a bit whatever, talking about the tennis player Michael Joyce, but then finally, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, the titular essay of his experiences being on a cruise ship, which honestly, I thought it was fine. There were some things that are a bit like, I like, I think that David Foster Wallace's comedy really shines in that one, and to some degree, it's a better example of him being like absurdly hyper-realistic about a mundane task, and so it lands better than the essay on the Illinois State Fair. But yeah, at the end of the day, I kind of found that, like, as opposed to the E Unibus Plurum or the David Lynch thing, where he had a maybe more stronger core thesis, I found that I didn't really come away from the final essay, and really most of the essays in this collection, with any lasting impression. It was just that I kind of enjoyed reading them. I have felt for a while that in terms of making non-fiction entertaining, David Foster Wallace is still one of my big influences, and so really reading any of his non-fiction has been really beneficial. But I just sort of, and I get that, Consider the Lobster was written a bit later. He developed his style. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if A Supposedly Fun Thing was written. Okay. So this book came out, I think, the year before or the year after Infinite Jest. I can't remember. I think Infinite Jest was 96, and this came out in 97. So, but most of the essays were written, in early 90s. So he was kind of, I guess, working on Infinite Jest at that time. But yeah, really the E Unibus Plurum, just some highlights is that he talks about the relationship between how writers usually, in order to write about people, writers need to observe people. However, television seems like a sort of perfect a perfect deluge of that. You can just go and observe people all the time, everywhere. But of course, you're observing highly scripted people that know they're being observed. So it's this sort of faux voyeurism, which another book coming up, The Boxman, I'll talk about. But and he talks about the problems of being I think at the time that he wrote this, it was saying that Americans on average were spending 6 hours a day watching television, and he has this great kind of supplement character, Joe Briefcase, which is just a great name for a fake person. He goes. The essay gets a little bit rambly, and not in a bad way, actually. It kind of, I know I talked about how that was one of the essays that had a more stronger core thesis, but he goes off into a lot of different areas. He fixates on like some of the meta relationship and how television became aware of itself, which I think is super super cool and interesting. But they all feel like relevant points because he's talking about television, but it can get pretty rambly at some parts. Anyway, the essay is really good, and it makes you, if you're willing to think about E Unibus Plurum as kind of having evolved now into the internet and social media, I think the essay is still extremely prescient and worth checking out and thinking about. The David Lynch keeps his head. Yes, he's talking about David Lynch, specifically the movie Lost Highway, because he was sort of around. David Foster Wallace was around on set for some of it being filmed, but he talks about sort of postmodernism in film, and like how David Foster Wallace was really influenced by films like Blue Velvet to contextualize how to actually make avant-garde and abstractionism not cringe and self-serving. In some of this is where one of the big criticisms I have. Some of it shows up where he's talking about some of the actresses. In Wallace's extremely neurotic deep dives and analyses, he tends to focus a lot on how people look, how they're presenting, what they're wearing, and a lot of the time he seems to just like talk a lot about what women are wearing and focuses really heavily in on that. Well, not really heavily, but just enough that I noticed it, to the point where he's making, in a supposedly fun thing, he talks about like, using the mirrors of the stairwells to look up like skirts, and I'm just like, bro, you're like an adult. Like, what are you doing? And it's I don't know. It never verges on sexist. I don't think. It's just, I don't know. It's just not adultly, or it's just something you'd expect a teenager to say, which was it put it off a little bit. It pops up in the Illinois State Fair essay where he's talking about like some of the t-shirts that the people are wearing, but that was with the whole looking up skirts, that was the only standout example that I remember just being a bit like ugh about. But it's I don't know if it just comes with him being, super over analytic. Like, obviously, he's looking at a lot of things, taking a lot of notes, and he's going to notice what people are wearing. Yeah, some of the comments were just a bit like, not adult. But nevertheless, takeaways from this book. if I go back and reread, I'll probably reread the Lynch essay and the Unibus Plurum essay. I don't know if I'll reread much else. Let me know what you thought of this collection. I still kind of stand by that it doesn't hold up as strongly as Consider the Lobster, even though now 2 for 2, David Foster Wallace's titular essays were not even the best in the book. But yeah, let me know what you thought, and I'm keen to get even more suggestions for some things to read. I do want to get more into non-fiction essays, because I'm trying to write some of my own. So please give me some recommendations for anything of a Wallace or that's similar writing to Wallace. Oh shit, just totally kicked the fucking camera. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.